Hello Internet, my name is Siren and welcome to my channel Records of Siren, my personal little library for storing the records of my mini crafting adventures. This February, I challenged myself to alter as many clothing items as I had the time and energy for, so today in this video I'm going to be taking you along with me to do just that. Once again, I'll put a list on the screen of all the materials and tools that I used for these projects. I did splurge on some thread from my last project by opting for cotton instead of polyester. So that would have been my biggest expense at about $7, but it is also a lot of thread and will probably last me forever. Alright, so this was the first piece I altered this month. As you can see, it was a long-sleeved mesh bodysuit type shirt with the built-in tank top. While I really love the design of the mesh itself, I wasn't a big fan of the tank top inside, and I wanted to turn the mesh portion into an undershirt. Additionally, I wanted to transform it from a bodysuit with fasteners at the bottom into just a regular long sleeve shirt. Naturally, the first step I took in this process was to separate the shirt from the tank top using a seam ripper. If you prefer to make this a much quicker, simpler process, you could definitely try cutting the bottom seam off of the shirt using some fabric scissors. Personally, I chose to seam rip for two main reasons. First is that I could definitely use the practice. Not only is neatly seam ripping a skill, but doing it also helps me to understand the way that a garment is constructed. For example, you can see here that the bottom of both the mesh shirt and the tank top were sewn together with a piece of elastic in between them. Which leads me into my reason two, being that I wanted to reuse this elastic, so I needed to free it from its fabric prison anyway. To seam rip this, I went at it from two different angles. To start, I had gone from the inside of the shirt and worked on ripping out stitches from the seam there, being careful not to cut the elastic. On the other hand, I also seam ripped by tightly but carefully pulling the tank top fabric away from the mesh fabric at the seam and then ripping at the threads that connected them from the outside. Once I kind of got into the swing of things, I preferred using the second method since it seemed to be faster and cleaner. But there were definitely areas in which using the first method was easier. Between the fact that I was staring at tiny black stitches connecting black fabric over black elastic, the constant cramping of my ripping hand, and the fact that the shirt was actually pretty well constructed, this actually took me like 4 days to complete. Eventually, I got the entire thing seam ripped except for where the fasteners were located on the bottom. These areas were reinforced and really difficult to seam rip, so I just went ahead and cut them off with fabric scissors. So here's the final result of all of that ripping. Now, for this project, I'm going to be using the mesh shirt and the elastic, but I currently don't have any plans for the tank top or fasteners, so I'm just going to set those aside for some crafts at a later date. Now that my shirt is separated, I can begin the process of reshaping it. So here, I'm just using some washable fabric chalk to create a rough estimate of how I want the bottom of the shirt to actually look. I wanted to keep the shirt as long as possible, but I also needed to make sure that the bottom would be relatively straight once I removed the parts that made it a bodysuit. That said, I wasn't too concerned with it being perfect since I am planning on wearing this tucked in as an undershirt. Then, once I was satisfied with the lines I had made, I went ahead and cut the fabric, making sure to cut both the back and the front of the shirt at the same time in order to try and achieve a more even cut all the way around. Since I finally had the basic shape of the shirt I wanted, it was time to get around to hemming and adding the elastic into the bottom. Adding the elastic back into the bottom will help make the shirt more form-fitting and prevent it from moving around much as I'm moving around in it. So I'm just going to take my shirt, which is currently inside out here, fold the bottom of the fabric in on itself once, and pin it all of the way around. Make sure here that the height of the fold is tall enough to fit in the elastic that you're going to be using. For this, I'll be using the elastic I got from disassembling the shirt. This is actually about 3/4 of the elastic since I accidentally tore it in two with the seam ripper, but luckily for me, it was the perfect length for what I wanted, so I just went ahead and used it with no changes. Now, do take note that since I'll be adding an elastic, I'm going to need to leave this hem unfinished. That way, once it's stitched together, I'll have a tunnel-like space in which I can thread my elastic through. So before I took this over to the sewing machine, I actually used some safety pins just to mark off a spot that I didn't want to sew over. And here, I'm just using a simple straight stitch almost all the way around. At this point, I'm really close to being done with this project. Yay, we're doing it. So what I'm doing next here is clipping a safety pin through both ends of the elastic. You really only need to clip one side, but clipping both sides can be very useful so they're both easy to find, and you can pull it back through the tunnel easier if you accidentally pull the wrong end through. Anyways, I'm taking one end of the elastic by the safety pin attached to it and inserting it into the tunnel created by the stitching at the top of the hem I just made. Once the safety pin was inserted, I just worked on threading it all the way through the bottom. There were some tight spots, but thankfully I was able to get the elastic all the way around without having to make any modification. Then the last two steps were pretty simple. I just hand stitched the two ends of the elastic together, making sure that no part was twisted, and then I finished stitching the rest of the hem together via my sewing machine. Oh, but wait, there's more. I also added holes for my thumbs and pinky fingers at the bottom of each sleeve. I'm still trying to figure out the best way to make these, especially when working with mesh fabric, so this process ended up being a bit messy. Essentially, my process here was to start by simply cutting some holes where I thought the thumbs and pinky fingers should naturally end up on the sleeves. After that, I cut off some extra fabric around the holes to make them bigger. Finally, I hand stitched around the edges to help prevent the fabric from fraying. Hopefully. Originally, I tried using a blanket stitch, but it didn't hold very well, so I ended up using just a simple whip stitch all the way around. Stitching around the edges does make them tighter, which is why it's important to cut the holes a bit bigger than you think you'll need to. So yeah, this was quite the messy process for me, but there's the gist of it. Moving on, this was the second item I altered this month. Again, it's a long sleeve mesh shirt, but this time it's cropped and, thankfully, tank top free. While I think it looks really cool, I've only ever worn this once in the whole time I've had it because of the way that it fits. Honestly, there's quite a few things I'm not super happy with about this shirt, but my main issue, which I'll be tackling here, is its length. You can see here that the shirt is cropped, but it ends up at kind of an odd length when wearing it, and there's nothing in place to prevent it from shifting in all sorts of weird, uncomfortable ways. The only thing fit-wise that this top has going for it is the two thumb holes I added in myself when I originally got it. So thankfully, I didn't have to worry about adding those in this month. So for this, I ended up just hemming the bottom and adding in some elastic. This was essentially the exact same process I did for the previous shirt. So turn the shirt inside out, fold and pin the bottom fabric inwards, mark off a section to keep open for later, use the sewing machine to hem the bottom, use safety pins to thread the elastic through the tunnel, hand stitch the elastic together, and close off the hem with the sewing machine. And it worked! This came out quite nicely and went by much faster than I anticipated. While I spent almost a week on my first shirt in this video, adding the elastic into this shirt only took me half a day. Of course, the experience from the previous shirt definitely helped me figure out what I was doing much faster. It's still not perfect, but I think I'll feel a lot more comfortable and confident wearing this shirt out now. For my final project in February, I wanted to tackle these high-rise denim shorts. I absolutely love these shorts, and if it were practical for me, I personally wouldn't have changed these at all. Sadly, though, I'll have to point out the fraying at the bottom of each leg here. Personally, I love a little fraying on denim jeans and shorts since I think it adds some texture and just makes them look really cool. That said, every time I wear and wash these shorts, the fraying gets to be too much for me, to the point where they look fuzzy. I've already taken scissors to these a few times to trim up the fraying, so I figured if I want to keep wearing these shorts forever, then it was time for me to hem them. So I did just that. Oh boy, I hope you're not getting tired of all the hemming yet. So, because this fabric is prone to fraying, however, I'm going to hem it a little differently. That is, I'm going to fold the fabric in on itself twice before sewing over it with my machine, just like I did for the shirt in my last video. I talked a bit more about the process in that video, but essentially this method will help prevent further fraying by actually hiding the raw edges away inside the fabric. Anyways, you know the drill by now, so not only am I folding the fabric, but I'm also making sure to pin it in place, then taking it on over to the sewing machine to stitch it all in place using a straight stitch. Because I decided to pin both legs of these shorts at the same time, getting that first leg finished felt akin to wrangling a porcupine. However, no blood was spilled that day, and the process went by relatively smoothly. And once more, audience, we are done with this project. I was afraid that my hemming would be super uneven on these and that I'd have to redo them like 5 times, but I'm actually really satisfied with how they came out. Like I said before, I absolutely love these shorts. They might look a little different now, but I can rest easy knowing that they're not just one wash away from potentially becoming unwearable. And they still look pretty cool if I do say so myself.
You're everything I'm thinking of from time to time and dust to dust. Whenever there's a lull between the void, you feel the silence languid on the couch. Think I need to figure this one out. I'm lost beneath your cloud. Can I keep my 2 feet on the ground? Wake me, I'll love you tomorrow. You leave me breathless and hollow. Lately, a tough pill to swallow, but I'll try to compose. I could be, I suppose, someone you should get to know. I could be, I suppose, someone you should get to know. I could get lost in pillow dreams, caught in a stitch of what could be. Careful lifetime's not what it seems. Shake this one off and dance with me. We're dancing through the house. Think we need to figure this one out.
Wow, so that was all 3 of the alteration projects that I completed in the month of February. And in other words, that is 3 pieces of clothing added back into my wardrobe. I am hoping that the weather will be on my side and that these will all be perfect for this coming spring. Personally, I love wearing mesh and fishnet shirts under t shirts, and I've really been trying to acquire shorts that I'll actually be willing to wear outside. So, this was the perfect time for me to get these projects all finished up. Before I go, I just want to make my posting schedule a bit more clear. I know last time I said I wanted to try posting monthly, but I realized very quickly that that was not going to be sustainable for me, even in the short term. So I'm planning on posting videos bi monthly on the last Friday of the month instead. That way, I have more time to work on both creating and editing. If I do make some shorter videos and or get ahead of schedule, I'll just go ahead and upload those as some fun bonus content. But yeah, things will be bi-monthly for now. Anyways, that's all for me. Have fun crafting.
Wake me, I love you tomorrow. You leave me breathless and hollow. Lately, a tough pill to swallow, but I'll try to compose. I could be, I suppose, someone you should get to know. Oh, I could be, I suppose, someone you should get to know. Someone you should get to know.